So this presentation is about the invisible substrates of information science. The first substrate has to do with psychology. Those are learning and cognition. The second substrate has to do with philosophy. And tonight we'll be looking particularly at ontology and epistemology. This phrase, invisible substrates of LIS, is not my own. I think it was coined by Marcia Bates, who is the author of the first article that you will be reading for session 4. This idea of invisible substrates of library and information science gets at the idea that when we're doing library and information science, we're not doing just library and information science. We're not doing just cataloging, just circulation, just reference, just information architecture. Underlying all of these things are these invisible substrates. They're sort of the theoretical underpinnings of our field, or some of the assumptions that we're making, or even theories and ideas about the realms in which we're working. So if we're going to be information specialists in a law library, then there is an invisible substrate there of the entire universe of how things work in the legal world. And so on top of all the, traditional library science stuff that you have to know to be a law librarian, you also have to know the extra stuff about the legal aspects of the work that lawyers do, with lawyers being your main user group. So that's the idea of the invisible substrates of LIS. Tonight we're just looking at two categories, like I said, the psychology and the philosophy. So, like I said, in this presentation, we're going to look at philosophy and psychology as invisible substrates of library and information science. When we look at philosophy as an invisible substrate, what we're looking at are the underlying perspectives or paradigms that people and organizations have when they develop systems, or when they are information seekers who use information, or when they are individual practitioners who practice in the information professions. So your individual or organizational or cultural perspectives or paradigms have implications for information seeking from the user side and information systems from the information professional side. On the psychology side, we're especially interested in the cognitive and psychological processes of the information seekers and information users, because the ways that they think and the ways that they make decisions and pay attention and all of this do have implications for how they will seek information, what kinds of information systems they will need, how they will use those systems, what will be relevant to them, how they will want to inquire about it. Some of the answers to those design questions come from an understanding of the psychological and cognitive makeup of the people who are expected to use the systems. So let's get a little bit more familiar with our philosophy vocabulary. Tonight we're going to talk about terms, and we're going to talk about episteme and ontology as particular branches of philosophy. So Webster's defines a paradigm as a philosophical or theoretical framework. That's a little bit vague for me. Um, I see a paradigm as a way of seeing the world. A paradigm includes our assumptions, many of which we don't even know we have. For example, the world of quantum physics is so confounding to scientists because the scientific paradigm includes the assumption that certain forces work throughout the universe. But gravity doesn't obey Newton's laws in quantum environments. So scientists are continually confounded because quantum level objects do not behave according to their assumptions. So currently they're trying to sort of establish new paradigms for understanding the quantum level. Right now, the scientific paradigm that encompasses the quantum level is that the universe has certain rules like gravity, magnetism, electromagnetism, so on and so forth. And all of those things work predictably in XYZ situations except in the quantum universe. And so there's just sort of that asterisk there. And as they come deeper and deeper into an understanding of quantum mechanics and other aspects of quantum physics, then perhaps they can refine the paradigm and come up with an all encompassing worldview that accounts for the different ways that the world behaves, whether on the large scale or the tiny quantum scale. But the underlying definition here, that the paradigm is a philosophical or a theoretical framework, just means that when you're walking around, you have certain assumptions about how things are, like that gravity exists, or that people are good, or that God exists, or God doesn't exist. And these things are just sort of internal and inherent in the way that you see and interact with the world. It's a very fundamental thing. So your personal paradigm isn't something that you can, write down on a piece of paper in a couple of minutes, or it's not going to be, something that you can say on, Facebook that you belong to the paradigm of XYZ, like you belong to a church or to a civic organization. Part of the paradigm is the epistemology. So, epistemology is the branch of philosophy that asks, how do we know what we know? Or what does it mean to become known or knowable? Whenever we say that we know something, epistemology is there to ask you to critically look at how you think you know that. What did you know before that allowed you to assimilate that knowledge? How deeply do you know that? Can you teach it to a 5-year-old? So on and so forth. Ontology is the branch of philosophy that looks at what are the kinds of things that have existence. Ontology is the intellectual practice of naming, cataloging, organizing the objects in the world, the components of reality, the things in existence, and the relationships among those. So that's sort of your background philosophy vocabulary. And a lot of what we're talking about tonight has to do with paradigms, which include epistemologies and ontologies. I've isolated epistemology and ontology as aspects of a paradigm for us to look at because I think that those two fields of philosophy particularly have implications for library and information science, as we'll see a little bit further on in the presentation. So how exactly do paradigms come into play in the organization and management of information? Well, as I've said a couple of times before, and I'll say again, every representation is an interpretation. That comes into play because behind every information system is an implicit and or an explicit paradigm. So if we're looking at a traditional library system like the Library of Congress, the ontology that the Library of Congress presents to its users is the Library of Congress classification scheme or the Library of Congress subject headings. Those two things sort of constitute the vocabulary of what the librarians can say the books are about. If a book is about something that doesn't fall into those classification schemes or that subject heading list, then that book can't be described in the universe of the Library of Congress. So that is an act of ontology to create any kind of index or classification scheme or vocabulary for cataloging. Epistemology influences the user model. User model, that's sort of the term we use in our discipline to describe the way that the information system or the people who are designing the information system understand the user. So our user model, if we're the law librarian, says that our users are probably trained attorneys who have passed the bar and work for the practice that you're working for. Our user model also knows some of the things that these attorneys already know. It knows something about the kinds of time constraints that they work under. It might even know when an attorney comes to the law librarian with a particular task that they want the librarian to do. Based on the type of task, the librarian might be able to make some predictions as to the urgency or priority of getting that information relative to the other tasks that she has in front of her. So all of that has to do with the user model. It's the understanding of the people who design a system or the people who practice in the information professions about the characteristics of their user group. That's their user model. So your underlying paradigm can influence how you interpret or represent the behaviors or characteristics of your user group. It can influence which kinds of characteristics you pay attention to. It can also influence if you're working for the Library of Congress on their classification schemes. It can influence what kinds of relationships that you think should be included among the concepts and the subject headings in the classification scheme. So that's how paradigms come into play for us. Our paradigms color our interpretations of information, and our interpretations of information color how we represent information.